Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast. And as you know, the theme for December is all about intersectionality in disability. And today we're going to be talking about ADHD and being Muslim and the Muslim experience, or one person's Muslim experience of being diagnosed with ADHD when they have turned 30. And to do this with me is the wonderful Rahimeh Ramezany. She's a multi-ethnic, neurodiverse, visibly Muslim American woman, and she is a diversity, equity, inclusion, and intercultural specialist. Now, no matter how big or small, all of us have spheres of influence to push for greater inclusion, equity, and intercultural understanding. Rahimeh's work is focused on addressing the experiences of marginalized religious, racial, and ethnic communities in the United States in order to create change on an individual, interpersonal, and systemic scale. And we know in this show how we love talking about systems. She holds a master's degree in intercultural communication from San Jose State University and a certificate in advanced global leadership from Lucas College of Business Global Leadership Advancement Center. And in 2016, she served as a fellow at the Summer Institute of Intercultural Communication. And since then, she's worked at multiple diversity, equity, and inclusion focused consulting firms and nonprofits in program management, training, and consulting capacities prior to starting her own business in June 2021. So Rahimeh, a huge welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
We're so happy to have you. And I've read out your bio and a little bit about you, but I always think it's lovely for the listeners to hear from yourself a little more about what you do and your passion behind that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So my name is Rahimeh Ramezany. I use she, her pronouns. I am a diversity, equity, inclusion, and intercultural specialist specializing in Muslim inclusion and equitable access, religion in diversity, equity, and inclusion work, or DEI work, and ADHD inclusion, which we're here to focus on today.
Indeed. And it's really lovely to hear that, you saying that introduction, because it is all about the plurality intra-culturally. We often think about difference interculturally or inter between different groups, but there's so much intra as well. So it's really brilliant that you're doing this work.
Thank you.
So how did you get into this world? How did you get into the work that you do, Rahimeh?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting because the field of DEI is so young compared to, all the other fields that one can work in. There isn't at this point a straight shot of like go to college, or I think in the UK you call it uni, right? Is that a thing?
Yep, university. Yeah, uni. Yeah.
You go to college, you get a degree, a bachelor's in DEI or something similar. You get a job, you go entry level and work yourself up the ladder. That just doesn't exist because it's such a young field. So I didn't even know that DEI as a field existed until grad school. I went to school for communication studies, specifically intercultural communication, which from my intro, I was still very much a part of the work that I do. I really love the intersection of diversity, equity, and inclusion and DEI. I feel like they really lend a lot to each other and make each other stronger. So I went to grad school for intercultural communication. I went to the professor in the department who specialized in that. And I'm like, hey, I want to learn everything I can about this in this very 2 short years that I knew the program would just fly by. And she recommended a couple of conferences, which I love. Professional conferences, so much fun. But I love to learn. So that's like my nerdy, I guess, thing, weird thing. Some people look at me funny, like conferences. Oh, that's weird. You don't know, you don't understand. And then from there, working with or going and meeting people in the field and coming across diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially around like privilege and power dynamics and areas of advantage and disadvantage. So I feel that intercultural communication lends itself very well to understanding cultural differences, which is the whole point. However, DEI adds the lens of like those cultural differences are not all on an even playing field. For instance, if I were to send a white American woman who's not Muslim to Saudi Arabia and not mention anything about gender dynamics or cultural differences. Like, I'm actively putting her in harm's way. And in the same way, say if I have a Saudi man who dresses in like traditional Arab clothing come to the United States, like I'm also actively putting him in harm's way. There was an article like a number of, I think, years ago before COVID that talked about that there was an Arab man who wore traditional clothing and he was like attacked in like a gas station because like non-Muslim Americans associate certain clothing from certain cultures as like harmful or evil people or something like that. So like the aspect that there are politics, there's power, there's privilege going on, discrimination, like we're actively putting people in harm's way if we don't prep people to protect themselves. Does that make sense?
Thank you so much. Yes, it makes a lot of sense. And I think the examples you gave are very powerful, actually. And again, I think it shows how life isn't binary, that there's so many different shades. And I'm not just talking about gender non-binary, but non-binary in the way that we think about everything. And I think it's that thing, isn't it, about how do we make people understand so they can have a positive experience in that environment with other humans and create connection. And that's what this is about, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. 120%.
And so, Rahimeh, you've talked about being diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 30. And I wondered if you wanted to share a bit more about your ADHD journey, how it came about. And again, I know that in America, things are far more medicalized than they are in the UK. So it might be interesting to pick up on that as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's very interesting. So I am very newly diagnosed with ADHD, as I mentioned, at age 30. I'm like 31, starting in June. And the idea being, so I went on to TikTok, of all things. And as someone who works in DEI and intercultural communication, like I actively go out of my way and enjoy and want to learn about other cultures, ethnicities, genders, I don't know, like nationalities, other cultures of any kind of background, so that I can be a more understanding, sensitive ally. I don't have to have people from different marginalized identities have to, stand up for themselves. I can step in with wherever I have areas of privilege and step in for them with their permission and consent, of course, and all of the things. Like I could just be a more sensitive, inclusive human being because I understand about their lived experience. Not, of course, to say that I can ever speak on their behalf, but just like as a representative so that they can relax and not have to like constantly be advocating for themselves. So having said that, I got onto TikTok for, just other reasons, just like for fun. And for whatever reason, the algorithm like started showing me ADHD and autism and other neurodiversity content. I'm like, oh, neurodiversity is something I don't know anything about. I'm so excited. Like this is a part of diversity that is a growth area for me. I'm so excited to be able to learn about this other group. And so especially with ADHD stuff, I don't have autism, but with ADHD, I'm like, oh, that's very interesting. Oh, everyone isn't like that? Oh, everyone. Oh, that's very interesting. And just like slowly over time, because with the idea with TikTok, it's not a scientific, way of learning about something. But if you have enough people over and 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 over again, all of these different people saying, hey, I have ADHD or I have this condition, whatever it may be. And this isn't what is normal, typical for most people. This is a very specific lived experience. I don't know about you, for instance, like one of the things with ADHD is that folks with ADHD can be very disorganized. And because I went 3 decades without being diagnosed, I had to find ways of coping with being disorganized. I have a very extensive planner and have since high school. I have to have like multiple reminders, multiple alarms on my phone for all different kinds of things. I have to plan out times to get dressed, to leave for an event, have buffer time because I'm always late. And I don't know how much of that is like having Middle Eastern background and being Muslim and stuff like that. But that's a whole other thing. That's a whole other thing. If you know, you know. But anyway, the idea being like all the stuff that, as someone who's lived 3 decades with ADHD, I've had to cope and learn how to manage it so I can keep a job, so I can have good grades and, finish college and stuff like that. you're not like looking at other people's planners to see like what is considered the norm. You just have your own. And so finally having all these accounts from real people saying like, this is what my life is like, this is what my life is like, over and over and over again, really led me to believe like, oh my gosh, this is me. And I've always felt like out of step with people. And it finally answered, a lot of why I felt like excluded. Thank God I was never bullied growing up. I'm very grateful, very grateful for that. Even though I have been wearing like hijab, or like the headscarf that some Muslim women wear since I was 11. Thank God I was never bullied for that. But yeah, just like excluded, not, my company was not preferred, never quite understanding what was going on with like, that seems odd. Rejection sensitivity is a really big part of ADHD, just because of, again, like this norm of feeling like othered all the time. And especially if it's not caught as a child, you're being held to neurotypical standards that you are never going to be able to match. So it always like, oh, you're lazy. Like, oh, lazy is a huge trigger word for me. Like, you're lazy. I just talked to a friend this past weekend who she thinks she has ADHD, which after she described it, I'm like, I'm pretty sure you have ADHD. And she's been called like an airhead. Like her family just like, oh, this person,
Oh
like,
gosh.
she's just such an airhead. And it's like, people actually need support. They need understanding. And the idea being, there's a medical model of neurodiversity and the neurodiversity model of neurodiversity. I think there's probably a better way of saying that. But the idea being like the medical model looks at ADHD, autism, Tourette, and other neurodiverse identities, and says like there's something wrong with you and you need to like take medication, or you need to like make up for your deficiencies. Okay. And then the neurodiversity model looks at it as like, okay, diversity in the human experience and identities is a natural part of the human race, just like race, just like languages, just like religions, like all of these things is like a natural part of being human. And the diversity of humans, neurodiversity is the same, and it is natural for different folks to have different kinds of brains. And the idea being that anything that is really getting in the way and causing problems in a neurodiverse individual's life and their life with other folks, like mostly neurotypical folks, is from a result of living in a world that is not designed for them or doesn't accommodate them in any way. It's just trying to force them into a box that they are literally not capable. Like, they need a different size box, right? Similar, like an analogy that I've heard used many times, which I really appreciate, is the idea of like left-handedness versus right-handedness. There's nothing wrong with being right-handed, and there's nothing wrong with being left-handed. It's just like a natural part of human diversity. But the world is clearly and predominantly built for right-handed people. And left-handed people go through their life with mouses for the computers and scissors and doorknobs and pens. And like, I want to say, like, I'm incredibly privileged. I am right-handed, living in a world designed for right-handed people. So I don't even perceive all the different ways that this privileges me. And the idea being that if someone, for instance, is left-handed and they're learning to write with a writing instrument that is meant for right-handers, their handwriting might be really messy, or they might be a little bit slower to write because they are being forced into a way that isn't their natural way. Like, if they were given something that was meant for them and how they actually inherently are, they would be really good. And you then judge people for not fitting into the box, that like they're not getting the accommodations that they need to thrive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And in the UK, we call them workplace or reasonable adjustments. So in our Equality Act 2010, I know in America, you call them accommodations. And yes, I do feel that in America, due to the private health system, there is much more pill swallowing. Whereas I think in the UK, I'm not saying it's perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I do feel there's been a huge shift in the last 5 years in workplaces to talk about, neurodivergence and this kind of, so, and I hate the term atypical, because what is that? What does that mean? But neurotypical in the terms of, like you said, society's designed for people who do things in a certain way. But I think it's really important that we just think of it as work preferences. So how do you like to work? What makes things difficult for you? What makes things easier for you? As a manager, just talk to me. I don't need your medical history, but what I do need to know is, okay, I need to give you information like this. I need to address you in this way. I need to lay out things in this way. I might have to have 2 one-to-ones in a week for half an hour each and not one for an hour and a half. And I think it's those practical things that are so important. And we don't need to be fearful of it. You know, there's no fear in any of this, but yet that's the way it can come across.
Yeah, definitely. And honestly, there are a lot of workplaces that see this as, I don't know, like, oh, you're just not good at your job and you're just trying to make excuses. So folks who are neurodiverse, who have disabilities, who have mental illnesses and so on, feel like they are being forced to just make do with whatever they have, especially given, yes, in the United States, the healthcare system is unfortunately tied to your employment status. So if you are not employed, and if you're not employed full time, not even if you have a part-time job or 2 part-time jobs or a contractor or so on, like, your healthcare is out the door. It's really problematic.
It's very, very problematic. And I also wondered whether you wanted to comment on your religious identity and how that has had how that's woven through your ADHD journey to date.
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, like, it's definitely new, and I have slowly been reaching out to people in my community, friends, and because no one I know in the Muslim community up until a few months ago had ever mentioned ADHD to me, ever. And even for me, like, as of January of 2022, I still thought of ADHD as like the loud little white boy in like a 3rd grade, 2nd grade class, like an 8-year-old running around making noise like that. And that was what ADHD was. And that's it. Right. So even for me, like, the idea, it was a huge learning curve. So it's funny. So like when I would go to events in the community and I would like just tell people, I just like weave it into the conversation to see how they reacted. Like I had a number of people like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, your life is over. I'm like, no, that's not, that's not a thing. Having to explain, like, you know, again, like the neurodiversity model and like, you know, I'm still a normal human being. It's fine. Like, you don't have to worry about, like, I don't know. I don't even know. Like, people are just so shocked because it's just not discussed. However, since then, like, as I continue to work with, you know, friends and like dripping it on people and kind of like rolling it out, finding other people who are like, oh, you know what, actually I have been wondering about this and I've kept it to myself all this time because I didn't know anything about it or I didn't know other people about it. And honestly, that is such a beautiful thing that I appreciate about learning from TikTok, learning about things online, and then just talking about and normalizing things, including other mental health stuff like depression, anxiety, things that people are going through. We might all, and a lot of us, especially like given the last couple of years in the world and just the news will not stop coming, a lot of people have depression. A lot of people have anxiety. There's a lot of people with neurodiverse identities that, because we feel for whatever reason there's a taboo or, oh, it's not like accepted for us to just talk about it openly. A lot of us are sitting alone in our own little corners of the world, suffering and like not knowing how to support ourselves or what should we do and how to organize our lives to accommodate ourselves. And instead of like just talking openly so that people who don't experience that can understand a little bit of what it is to live with these kinds of conditions and then be more sensitive and accommodating and like inclusive. And then also just feeling that connection that you're not alone. When I was diagnosed with depression earlier this year, and it's definitely not the first time I've had a depressive episode, but this last so fall 2021 to like winter 2022, I went through a major depressive episode. And again, it wasn't the first time, but it was the first time I like had been working with a therapist through that, and she diagnosed me with depression and anxiety, and it really rocked my world. Even though I'd gone to therapy multiple times throughout my life with different therapists, I, you know, consume content on social media from therapists that talk about mental health. Like, it's not, I'm not someone who like sees mental health as a taboo or hasn't learned about it for a long time. But even still being told that you have like clinical depression is really, it was shocking to me. I don't want to speak for other people. It was very shocking to me. But then being able to talk to a number of friends who I trusted, who I knew would hold space for me, they normalized it. They're like, yes, I actually experienced similar things, or I know a lot of other people who experienced this. Like, actually, the fact that you were strong for so long, like reframing it into like, oh, you're a weak human being and like a failure, to like the fact that you've been going through all these difficult things in the world and in everyone's personal lives. Like, we all have our own personal struggles. The fact that you've been going through all of this, and it's only now that you have been this affected, is actually a sign of strength. I'm like, wow, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. And like, honestly, aside from like medical interventions, I'm on an antidepressant, which, I'm very grateful for. Medication, this is not medical advice, but, and please, go see a licensed professional, which I was working with at the time and all of that. But the idea being like, go and get medical professional help, and at the same time, like, our community care and aspect of just feeling understood is just so, I can't even I'm so grateful for having people in my life who just normalized those things and made me feel like I wasn't alone. And again, like, that I'm a failure of a human being for, like, being affected by like the garbage fire that is this world the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have my friend, Dr. Magdalena Bachmeyer, she always says that, people have phobias, if people have depression, if people have anxiety, it's not that they're weak, they're actually very strong to carry these things for periods of time and be able to live some kind of life. So we have to think of it that way and not, I mean, you don't need to tell me, do you, Rahimeh?
Yeah.
I'm going to be on the same wavelength as you. But I think, unfortunately, we still have a mountain to climb, even though in the UK we've had lots of campaigns, we talk about stigma, and then when it comes down to it, it's the whole thing that you referred to, which is, well, you're not very good at your job, oh dear, what are we going to do with you, we've given you a week off. And we know it's a journey, not a destination. And if someone becomes ill, they may not get back to exactly the same point they were 20 years ago. They might be better, they might be in a place where they're working towards that. We don't know what someone's journey is, and I think there's often a lack of understanding. Well, I'm fine, I recovered from it, so why can't you?
Yeah, I know. And people's like, their condition, their experience with ADHD, with depression, with anxiety, with anything like this is so different just on its own. But then also we all have like societal and personal family factors that play into it. How much support do you have from friends and family? Or are your friends and family actually like problematic and giving you a hard time, so you feel like you're being barraged from all ends and not being supported? If you haven't had the opportunity, or for whatever reason you still have like a block in your mind around the idea of going to therapy, so you don't even have support through that, like on and on and on and on. Like, if you're in a toxic work environment aside from your own personal struggles, like, then that is so hard to experience. I've had a number of workplaces where it's been incredibly toxic, and that just wears you down and stresses you out so much. There's just like all these layers. And again, like, what's going on in the news and the world, I've had to literally just cut myself off from the news, which I feel I don't like that I've had to do that at all, because especially working in DEI, I feel like there is a responsibility, and honestly, like, as a world citizen, to have a general understanding of what is going on in the world, so I can be aware of like the movements of history and so on. However, for my mental health, I literally cannot, like, I get so stressed every time. Like, my mom lives with me, and when she watches like the traditional news on the television, if I'm in the room for even like 30 seconds, I can feel my anxiety like kicking up. I have to like step away out of the room and just can't hear it. It's just, I don't know, in the UK it's this way. I very much hope it's not, but in the US, the news, like traditional news on the television stations, are incredibly fear-based. Like, the world is ending, the world is ending, the world is ending, the world is ending, like, all the time. I'm like, why on earth would I watch that? Like, I can't do anything about it. So you're just feeding me this fear-based information, and then now I'm gonna like go to bed on that. How I can't do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about then, mental, it's not obviously having a neurodivergent condition that gives you mental ill health. It's the barriers that you face that then can result in mental ill health. So thinking about mental ill health, neurodivergence, and culture, and for anyone, and of course you can only speak from your own Muslim experience, and that of your friends and people that you are in your community. And I think something we haven't really talked about directly is of course Islamophobia as well, in the workplace and society at large. But for someone who maybe from your perspective who identifies as Muslim, which we also know, Rahimeh, and you sort of mentioned it at the beginning, encompasses many, many different cultures. And I was saying to you earlier that in the UK we have an issue where it's South Asian people who may have a Pakistani or Indian descent will be Muslim, and of course we know that's not true. It spans many, many cultures. But from your perspective then, what do you think are the biggest challenges in accessing this support? So if someone does need therapy, or they want to just talk about their ADHD, or they think they might have ADHD, what are some of those challenges and what do we need to be aware of in the workplace?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. What a question. Yeah.
I like asking small questions.
Yeah. Just like, what do you think we should do? Like, oh, let me give you like 2 tips and this is going to solve all of our problems. I'd be so rich if that were the case. Yeah, the idea being that, and I appreciate Layla you saying this, and I will just clarify it again. I say this before everything that I answer about like, tell me about Muslim culture. And of course, like this is not absolutely from your perspective, but I just have to say this literally every single time. Honestly, not just on like podcasts and on recordings, but also in interpersonal conversations. I always say this. So there are estimated 1.8 billion Muslims in the world from all different countries, speaking all different languages, from different genders, different socioeconomic statuses. They have different education levels and on and on and on and on. And their religion, even if you just look at religion, there's different sects that do believe slightly different things. There's levels of religiosity and on and on and on and on. So I'm going to give an answer for, the audience listening. But please keep in mind, again, like Muslims, just like any group you can think of are incredibly diverse. There's no group that is a monolith. So on. Okay, great. Awesome. So we established that. So having said that, with the idea of Islamophobia in the workplace, there's a lot of microaggressions. There's a lot, like, even if you even get hired, there's a lot of Muslim women who choose to wear hijab, who feel that they are pressured or like explicitly are told to take their hijab off. There's a lot of issues with names and people. If you have a non-anglicized name, that you are pressured to change your name to an anglicized name. I know there's a lot of elders in our community. Like everyone knows, like I'm 31. I already said that. So a lot of my elders who are like 50, 60 years old, who were in the workplace or are just about to leave the workplace for a well-deserved retirement, they did change their names. And actually I was asked when I started working, like, oh, would do you want to pick like some sort of like anglicized white person name? And I'm like, no, I would never. And honestly, I had a lot of judgment of like my elders at that time. Like, I'm proud of my identity and I would never change that about myself. And I had to work through that of like, that's an incredibly privileged thing to live in a like era where I can push back against those expectations, especially if you have like, again, the intersection. If this person is an immigrant as well, they speak with an accent. And then also they have, a non-anglicized name and on, like all of these different things, like, they're just trying to feed their families. It's really complicated. So I had to unlearn this very strong judgment that I had of other folks and especially elders and what they had to do to literally just survive like all the discrimination that they were facing. So, but we all learn, and when we know better, we do better. So if you even get hired to begin with, if you do keep your non-anglicized name the way it is, people mispronouncing it, people saying like, oh, I couldn't possibly ever pronounce that, so I'm just going to call you blank, right? Or like, I get asked this a lot, like, do you have a nickname that, you go by? And I'm like,
wow.
No, I don't.
Gosh.
And I've never had a nickname. And I'm just like, no, I don't. You're going to have to learn that. And that's the thing, like, I really go out of my way to help people because most people, and I'm myself, like I feel so bad when I mispronounce people's names. I presume that most people who interact with me want to like genuinely say my name correctly. So it's like, let me help you, help me, help you, help me, help you. And so I put my name pronunciation like in my email signature. I put it on my LinkedIn. I have it on Zoom. I have it like all these different places. So if someone wanted to know how to pronounce my name, and I'm more than happy to help people learn how to say it. My only issue is when they like don't ever ask. They clearly haven't looked at all of these different assist places, and then they just like say it wrong. I actually was on a live cast a couple of months ago where the host like really mispronounced my name. The first time I usually let it go, and then the second time they did it, and I on the live cast corrected them, and I'm like, I don't feel bad, especially as a recovering people pleaser. I'm very proud of myself that I corrected this person like on live on the recording. And I'm like, no, I have done all of this work. They're just going into this example of names. I have gone to all this work to make sure that I'm helping other people pronounce my name correctly, because I understand that this name is not from your culture. When I talk to Arabs, like I studied abroad in Jordan for a summer in grad school, and it's really funny when like because they can obviously tell that I'm not Jordanian. And when I would say my name, like they would just light up like, oh my gosh. But like Arabs say, so my name is like a Persian Arabic hybrid. And but when Arabs say it, they say Rahimeh. And I'm like, you know what? No problem. Arabs, I give you a pass. I'm not gonna like argue with the no. Like it's all good. But like they just light up. And so like that's the thing. Like in a lot of places in the world, my name is not like so foreign. It's like a quote unquote
and that's
normal
the thing. What is neutral and standard?
What is normal? Exactly.
It's from a Eurocentric perspective. It's a Eurocentric perspective. Yeah, absolutely. And so your name's familiar to me, but I did check how to pronounce it because again, I do this actually with South Asian friends and colleagues, because sometimes people prefer the anglicized pronunciation. So I say, this is how I'd pronounce your name. Is it correct? And then they can say yes, no, and I don't have to. And I also say to people, if I get it wrong, I'm trying my best to get it right, but please keep correcting me. I know it's not your responsibility, but please feel free to tell me.
But like I like the relationship aspect of it, right? Like if you had a friend, if you had someone who like demonstrated that they want to learn and there's a sincerity behind it, I think like it's not a labor of education, it's different. And then also, sorry, going back to, I know I can go on tangents, which is absolutely an ADHD thing, the ADHD thing, by the way. If you're listening to this, if you know someone who may or may think that they have ADHD, like definitely going on tangents like, oh, this reminds me of this thing, and this reminds me of this thing, and off you go, and then you're like, wait, what were we talking about again? Like, this was a fun conversation. I just don't remember where we started. But going back to the question of like Islamophobia, names, hijab, and the idea with Islamophobia that's really big that a lot of people don't really talk about is the idea that Islamophobia is not just like discrimination against Muslims, but anyone who is perceived to be Muslim. So our Sikh brothers and sisters, our Hindu brothers and sisters, anyone who's like looks Muslim, whatever that means. It usually means like brown people. Again, and also like, there are a lot of people of African descent in the United States, African Americans, Black folks in general.
Absolutely.
There's a huge percentage of Muslims who are Black, who are in Africa, African countries that are Muslim African countries. And like people don't even like, honestly, like non-Black Muslims also have this issue. Like we don't even think of Black folks as Muslim. And I'm like, anyway, so it's just this idea of like who looks Muslim. In the United States, a number of years ago, there was an Arab man who's actually Christian, unfortunately Christian, unfortunately because he was killed. Like that's the point. Like not because unfortunately that he was Christian, but unfortunately he was attacked and killed by his like neighbor because they thought he was Muslim, and he wasn't. He wasn't Muslim. He was just Arab Christian. Right. But that is still an act of Islamophobia because he was perceived to be Muslim. So that's a really key thing about Islamophobia as well. It's not just like, oh, anything against Muslims, but, oh, if this person is Sikh and they're wearing a turban, that's actually not Islam. No, it is Islamophobia because they thought that this person incorrectly was and is Muslim. In the United States, it's not commonly known, but the first person who was killed in revenge for 9/11 in the United States was a Sikh man.
Yes,
right?
I
Wasn't
that.
even a Muslim.
No, I remember
right?
that. Yeah.
yeah, so anyways, it's difficult, and these sorts of things are still happening today, unfortunately. But in the workplace, the idea being that and this is where I love like the idea of like bringing cultural competency and intercultural communication. So even if you learn people's names, if you allow, for instance, women who choose to wear hijab to wear their hijab in the workplace, great. There's Muslims who pray the 5 daily prayers and some who don't. There's Muslims who fast during the month of Ramadan or fast outside of the month of Ramadan, allowing them to take time off for religious holidays, like, and all of these different things that you can think of, that, not allowing that if the person, for instance, has asked for a religious holiday off and they've given you like 2 months notice, like, why aren't you, like, there's still people. I know Ramadan a couple months ago, like there were people on LinkedIn. I'm, pretty active on LinkedIn. I had a bunch of Muslims on my feed talking about like, I put in notice like months ago and you're still not letting me off for one day, right? So that would be, I would consider that Islamophobia and so on. But also like there's a lot of kind of like microaggressions around cultural differences, which is, I would bring in the intercultural lens of like, for instance, in a lot of Muslim/non-Western cultures, having multiple generations living in a household is completely normal, right? It's actually like, why would a single person, all these single people, not single as in unpartnered, but just like individuals living, living on their own in like separate apartments instead of a family living together and having a more communal lifestyle. And of course, it's not for everyone. The point isn't to like paint a paintbrush and everyone should have this lifestyle. The point being is that some cultures live in this more communal collectivistic lifestyle, and that's a very beautiful thing. However, like, for instance, earlier in this conversation, I mentioned my mother lives with me. My mother's disabled mentally and physically, and I take care of her instead of having her in a home and all of that. Like, there's very serious reasons as to why that is. However, there are a lot of times where I'm really nervous bringing that up in non-Muslim settings because I'm worried they're like, oh my God, you live with your parent? Like, what kind of like, oh, millennials can't get out of their mom's garage. Like, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, leave me alone. And on like so many different examples of just like this cultural lack of cultural humility and understanding that there are other ways of living culturally other than the way you grew up. And it's not that any one way necessarily is correct or wrong, but just that you, especially folks, with racial privilege in the West, white folks, if they haven't gone and traveled in other areas, or they don't have friends or relationships, or I really love, again, like going back to TikTok, learning about other cultures on social media, because there's a lot of content creators from all different groups who have gone out of their way to share on social media, hey, this is my lived experience. And then you're not going out of your way to bother people for them to like explain their culture to you for free, on and on, right? So I really love learning about other cultures on social media. Of course, just like follow multiple folks, make sure you like don't assume anything when you meet someone in person, make sure, you understand that no group is a monolith, on and on, like all the things, right? Like, please have a critical mind to all of that. And the idea being, that you are looking at a group and assuming that anything that isn't like your culture, especially if you have an area of privilege, is by default wrong or stupid or lazy or whatever. Like, going back to neurodiversity, the idea being that a neurodiverse person, especially with ADHD, might need certain accommodations or understanding for the way their brain works, or being distracted, or on it, like all different kinds of examples around what ADHD can do for like changing how you work. And instead of just being like, oh, you're actually just a lazy, deficient human being, it's like, oh, okay, like we can understand that this person needs a little bit of a different working style. And it doesn't mean that your working style is bad or this person's working style is bad. It's like, let's just have a conversation to like meet each other in the middle.
Yeah, thank you. And what do you think the biggest challenges are in accessing support? So I think from my perspective, one of the things is finding a therapist or practitioner who can see things from your cultural perspective.
Yes.
That to me is a really big challenge, and maybe affording that as well. So yeah, of course we have the NHS here, but that doesn't mean you will necessarily get someone who's got that profile on the NHS. So it might be that you can't pay, although we do have a very robust third sector and voluntary sector in this country that does pick up a lot. So yeah, I don't know if you you wanted to say anything about sort of challenges in accessing support.
Yeah, absolutely. I would absolutely agree that it is the cultural differences between therapists and clients. I have gone to both Muslim therapists and non-Muslim therapists. And I think the first time I went to a non-Muslim therapist, I did have to spend, and that's ultimately why I didn't really work out, was like I spent a lot of time like having to explain like, no, that's not how Muslim culture works. Like, no, that's not like, especially around a lot of Western folks kind of like, oh, you should just cut off toxic people from your life, like parents or something.
Absolutely.
That's
And
not
I say
going
that
to happen
all the time. It's saying like, just walk away from it, draw your boundaries
like,
and go.
Oh no,
it's just not going to happen. Yeah.
And then you spend like a huge part of the session that you are paying for explaining your culture to them, and then they're like, oh, okay, that's interesting, and you're still not getting advice talking about just like on it, like just different cultural societal relationship structures of how to give feedback, maybe being more indirect, things with like how you treat and show respect to elders, like in a more egalitarian Western perspective. You might have an adult child like critiquing their parents to their face, and that might be considered okay. And again, I'm not debating one versus the other in this conversation. However, in like Islamic, like religious perspectives, like the respect for elders, especially for your parents, is really, really important. And I'm not saying like we shouldn't have critical conversations with our elders, but like you have to be a lot more indirect with it. And that's its own challenge, especially, and then also like appreciating the challenges that they went through. If you do have immigrant parents or one immigrant parent, and parents who don't have the kinds of privileges from you being born and raised. I say that because I have one immigrant parent, and like I said, I held a lot of judgment because my dad changed his name for work, and just I didn't appreciate all the things that he struggled with, and still to this day experiences a lot of discrimination because of his background and his accent that I don't have to deal with because I have an American accent and I live in the United States. So I live in the place that I was raised in, and I fit in and I walk a certain way because I have that level of comfort that I feel a sense of belonging here. Whereas my dad and other immigrants, a lot of the times, never really feel like a sense of belonging, even if they've been in the new country that they've immigrated to for decades and decades and spend more time in this country or whatever country they immigrated to compared to their birth country. So absolutely, the biggest challenge is the differences culturally between the therapist and the client, and just having to explain your culture and like, no, that's not how conflict resolution works in our culture. That's not how respect is shown between individuals. Also, like if you're talking from a religious perspective and not just like ethnic culture, there also is value differences, not necessarily like we all value justice and we all value mercy and generosity and stuff like that, but just kind of like the paradigm or like the foundation of why we believe in those things can be slightly different, especially like again from a religious perspective. Like Muslims believe in a holy book, we believe in certain principles and historical figures, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and so on, and we will use different reasonings to get to similar conclusions than non-Muslims will, again like with generosity and justice and honesty and those sorts of things that generally most people agree with are good things. And if you're using examples that don't really resonate with the person that you're talking to, you can like they can just kind of check out, or you're encouraging them to improve themselves in their lives, and their mental health is really not going to like resonate with them. As far as accommodations for mental health in the workplace, I would definitely say like microaggressions and just this like, I would really be interested to hear if this is in the UK, but in the United States, non-Muslim, non-Muslim like religious identities and non-Muslim like ethnic identities don't tend to, okay, I'm sorry, like white folks tend to have a perspective that if they haven't educated themselves, like they haven't traveled, very much like a cultural savior mentality, they don't even realize that they see their way of being and living as the correct way, and everything else is inferior by default. And that sets a tone that can be very toxic and very exclusionary and othering for the people that they're interacting with. I don't feel like I can come to you for support or advice, whether it's a manager, whether it's a coworker, whether it's a therapist, or whatever the relationship is, if you treat me in our interactions directly or indirectly like you think that you're like tolerating my culture. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because it doesn't feel like a genuine relationship, then
Yeah.
there's still a power imbalance.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, you do a lot of heavy work, Rahimeh, and this is you look after yourself, but it is also a lot to carry. So, how do you look after your own mental health, and what are your top 3 tips?
Oh, so self-awareness is really, 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 really important. And I have most recently been working on learning to listen to my body as a sense of wisdom and knowledge. Your body, your physical body is speaking to you. When it's telling you you're hungry, when it's telling you you need to step away from the computer and take a break, when you can feel like what I was describing earlier around like I'm sitting watching the television news with my mom and I can feel the tension in my body coming up, and listening to my body, not being like, oh, you're just weak. You should be able, like, oh, the shoulds. Oh, don't ever like should on yourself. Like you should just
That's
be
really
able to
great.
listen to, yeah, right. Like, oh my
Don't
gosh,
shit
shoulds.
on
Like,
yourself. That's
yeah,
really,
like be really attentive to shoulds when you start hearing your own mind, and when other people do it as well, like picking up on, oh, I should do this or I shouldn't do that or whatever, like aside from like moral things, right? We're just talking about like, I should be able to sit here and watch the news because that's what adults do. That's what is a good thing. And it's like, okay, we're not saying that that's not a good thing, but it is, my body is communicating to me through these feelings and stuff. I've been working at the computer for 5+ hours without ever getting up. I haven't eaten anything all day. Like my body is communicating to me that I need to step away and take a break. I need to take a nap. I need to go for a walk. Like I work from home. I'm very lucky. I'm very privileged. I like working from home. Very privileged to be working from home. Like go, you need to step out, just walk around the corner, get some sun on your face and come back. Like your body is speaking to you and communicating to you what your needs are, and having that awareness to listen to it instead. And that's absolutely an ADHD problem as well, though I'm sure a lot of folks struggle with it, is the idea, especially like you hyper focus on something if you're really interested in it or it's very exciting and novel and stuff like that. And you just spend hours and hours and hours doing it and you don't want to step away. Also, folks with ADHD can struggle with attention span or getting things done, like even executive dysfunction or like starting tasks. Even if you want to do the task, for some reason, like you can't get yourself to start the task. So when you finally do start the task, you don't want to interrupt yourself. So I get it's really a struggle, but honestly, like in the overall looking at taking care of yourself and self-care, being able to increase your self-awareness as much as possible. Of course, like having compassion around like how fast that takes for everyone, it'll be different. There's no correct way. There's no like, oh, I'm a bad human being because it's taking me so long to increase my self-awareness. So please, please, please don't beat yourself up. That's another thing, like having self-compassion for the things that you're going through. And honestly, like, yeah, that redirecting of the intention and the energy of, if I am struggling, which honestly, I don't know a single
Yeah,
person right now who's not
absolutely.
and hasn't
Yeah.
for a long time gone through a really hard time. Instead of being like, oh, I'm a negative human being, I'm weak, I am not good as other people, or so on. Like, instead of all of the negative self-talk, compassionately say to yourself, well, you know what, I am going through a hard time. Other people who would go through what I'm going through would also have a hard time. This is totally normal for me to be stressed out. It's totally normal for me to be feeling this way. And I am going to like compassionately and gently take care of myself in order to continue to function for myself, for my family, for my society, and so on. And for instance, for me, that has turned into like being incredibly selective about how much and what kind of news I consume, even though ideally I would very much, and still to this day, very much like to have a general understanding of what's happening in the news, because I do feel like you are a better like world citizen and better informed about the world. And especially like, living in a democracy, like I get to vote and, have a say in what's going on in the government, whatever tiny little bit that is. But still, and I'm not able to participate in any of that if I'm not aware of what's going on. However, because of, the way the cards are playing out right now in my life, like I just don't have the capacity for that. It's literally just stressing me out, and I'm like paralyzed. I can't act on it. So I'm just not going to, and I'm not going to shit on myself and be like, oh, you should, like, no, I'm sorry. Like I would like to at some point, and every once in a while, like every couple months, I like peek into like a news site, watching the news or something to like, hey, can I handle it? And then it like stresses me. I'm like, nope, still not, strong enough for that. And that's okay.
Thank you so much. And then finally, if people want to know more about your work, how should they find out about it? I will, of course, include these links in the show notes, but I thought you might like to share them as well with the audience.
Thank you. Yes, I would love to hear anyone who listens to the episode. If you get this far, thank you so much for honestly listening. Hearing your thoughts. But if you want to follow along with my work, I have a DEI consulting firm that I am launching in July 2022, which is the time we're recording this. You can find me on LinkedIn and TikTok. Those are the most active social media sites. I do a lot of writing on those video content on TikTok, where I just, do educational content. You can also find me on Instagram and YouTube, or my website, Rahimeh-Ramezany.com.
Lovely. And thank you so much for your time. And I know it's like early morning for you. It's a really easy afternoon time for me. So really appreciate it, Rahimeh. Your insights, being so open, sharing things, giving people a perspective on your lived experience and journey. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Layla. It's truly an honor to be able to speak to my lived experiences, and hopefully it resonates with some people and people feel understood, and also those who this isn't their lived experience can understand what's going on in the world for other people and have more compassion for both themselves and for other people.
Yeah, that's so lovely. And take care, listeners. And again, don't forget to reach out and access support if you need it. And we'll see you in the next episode. We're going to be talking more about intersectionality in disability. Until then, take care. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.